Number 1.
On September 23, 1992, Dale Dinwiddie went to a U2 concert at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia, South Carolina with a group of friends. After the concert ended at around 11:15 p.m., Dale and her friends headed to the Five Points area of Columbia and went to Jungle Jim's, a popular nightclub at the time. After being separated from Dale, her friends left at approximately 1 a.m. on September 24th. They told authorities they thought Dale had found another ride home, or called her parents to pick her up. This, however, was not the case. Dale was still in the nightclub. Around 15 minutes after her friends had left, Dale asked the bouncer at Jungle Jim's if he had seen them. At approximately 1:30 a.m., after chatting with the bouncer for a while, Dale walked north on Hardin Street. Dale has never been seen or heard from again. Dale is a white female with brown hair and brown eyes. One finger on each of her hands is noticeably curved. At the time of her disappearance, Dale was 23 years old, 5 feet tall, 152 centimeters, and weighed 96 pounds, 44 kilograms. She was last seen wearing a forest green pullover shirt, a blue nylon LL Bean jacket tied around her waist, faded blue jeans, and tennis shoes. In most missing person cases, you run across the suggestion that the person ran off to start a new life. This is usually never the case, and it is even more unlikely in Dale's case. From the beginning, the Columbia police have treated Dale's disappearance as a kidnapping. The authorities told the media there was nothing in her background to indicate that she would deliberately go away. Those close to Dale described her as a cautious person who did not like to be out alone. According to J.T. Ellison, a college friend of Dale, she wasn't the type of girl to just run off. She lived at home and was taking art classes with an eye on graduate school. Her parents and close friends immediately knew something was dreadfully wrong. She just wouldn't have not come home, not called, if she could. Additionally, Dale suffered from severe asthma and allergies that required twice-weekly injections and an inhaler to keep under control. Dale appears not to have taken any medication with her on her outing, suggesting she planned on returning home before long. Taking all of this into consideration, along with how difficult it would be to remain off the radar for years, I am convinced Dale did not willingly up and leave. The primary and most probable theory is that Dale was abducted and murdered. However, what is not clear is if Dale was taken by someone she knew or a stranger. Some people close to the investigation insist Dale was taken by someone she knew, or at the very least someone who had been stalking Dale for a long period of time. The Five Points area was extremely busy at the time of Dale's abduction. It was a popular party area for university students, and at around 1:30 a.m. lots of the students would have been mingling on the sidewalks, bar hopping, or heading home. Could someone really have been abducted from this busy area without anyone noticing? Many people believe cautious Dale would not have willingly got into a stranger's vehicle. This suggests to some the person who abducted Dale was familiar to her in some way, perhaps an acquaintance. If that was the case, she could have accepted a ride, and it would be unsurprising no one saw or heard anything. It has also been suggested the lack of clues in the case indicates Dale's disappearance was the result of a carefully planned abduction. Anyone who kidnapped her on impulse would most likely have been sloppy, leaving behind clues. In my opinion, however, this argument does not hold up well to close scrutiny. There is no known crime scene, so of course there were no clues. Although I lean more towards a stranger abduction in Dale's case, regardless of how rare they are, I am left wondering how the perpetrator got her out of the busy area without being seen. Over the years, there have been some suspects in Dale's disappearance. The authorities investigated if Ronaldo Javier Ray Rivera could have been involved in Dale's abduction. He confessed to murdering 4 Georgia women and is suspected in numerous other killings. What makes Rivera a good suspect? He is a violent killer and lived in Columbia at the time of Dale's disappearance. He even attended the University of South Carolina in 1992. This university is close to the Five Points area, Dale's last known location. Other than Rivera being in the area, though, no concrete evidence has ever linked him to Dale's abduction. He was sentenced to death for the 2004 murder of a police officer, as well as 7 life sentences for related crimes. Authorities have visited Rivera in prison and questioned him about Dale's disappearance, but nothing useful has come from the meetings. I am not sure if Rivera is merely a convenient suspect or Dale's killer. Either way, Dale's loved ones deserve answers, and someone needs to be held accountable for Dale's disappearance. What do you think happened to Dale? The authorities have not given up on finding Dale. South Carolina Law Enforcement Division forensic artist Debbie Goff created an age-progressed photo of Dale, drawing on family photos of her brother and parents that were taken through the years. Over the years, the authorities have followed up on over 1,000 tips. The tips have ranged from the useful to the ridiculous. Tips have led investigators to dig up deer bones, inspect various properties with ground-penetrating radar, tear up a floor at a Five Points home after reports of a foul odor, and pull a car from a pond at the suggestion of clairvoyance. Some good news is that Dale's dental records and DNA are on file. If her remains are ever found, odds are they will be identified, and the police will have some kind of crime scene to investigate. Considering the advances in crime-solving technologies, if the police can get their hands on any physical evidence, there might finally be some progress in the case. Although the odds are slim given how many years have passed since Dale's disappearance, her family still hopes the public can help. Jean Dinwiddie, Dale's mom, offered the following appeal: rethink. Anything you saw that didn't seem unusual at that time but may now, looking back on it, be a little unusual. Would you please talk to your friends and friends of friends who were there on that night? Maybe someone will remember something that could help us find Dale. There's a $20,000 reward for anyone with information that solves this case. If you have information regarding Dale's whereabouts, please call the City of Columbia Police Department at 1-803-545-3500 or Crime Stoppers at 1-888-274-6372.
Number 2.
Elvis was last seen in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina at 2 a.m. on December 18, 2013. She went on a first date on the evening of December 17, and her date dropped her off at her house in the 500 block of White River Drive just off River Oaks Drive. Elvis called her female roommate, who was visiting relatives out of state, at 3 a.m. to tell her how the date went. The conversation ended at 3:41. This is the last time anyone spoke to her. She has never been seen again. At 10:43 p.m. on December 19th, the day after she was last seen, Elvis's dark green 2011 Dodge Intrepid with South Carolina license plates was found locked and abandoned at the Peachtree Boat Landing along the Waccamaw River in Socastee, South Carolina. Her keys, purse and cell phone were missing from the car and hasn't been found. The place where Elvis's car was parked is on the outskirts of Myrtle Beach and only about an 8-minute drive from her parents' house. She liked to go out on the water occasionally, but she never went out late at night. Elvis was romantically involved with a 37-year-old married man, Sidney Moore, prior to her disappearance. Her roommate stated the relationship had ended more than a month before her disappearance, but on the night Elvis went missing, there were several calls back and forth between her and Sidney. The final call was at 6 a.m. according to Elvis's roommate. Elvis was upset and crying, and she told her roommate that Sidney told her he was leaving his wife to be with her. Sidney denied this and said he hadn't seen her since October. He admitted he called her at 6 a.m. on December 18th, but said it was only to tell her to stop calling him. In January 2014, William Christopher Barrett and Garrett Ryan Starnes were charged with obstructing justice in Elvis's case. Authorities stated neither man was actually involved in her disappearance, but both had interfered with the investigation and posted false information on social media. Barrett is a friend of Elvis's father, and allegedly tried to conduct a parallel investigation and search for Elvis. He denied having meant any harm. On February 21st, both Sidney Moore and his wife of nearly 20 years, Tammy Kaysen Moore, were arrested for 2 counts of indecent exposure and 1 count of obstruction of justice each. Shortly thereafter, they were charged with Elvis's kidnapping, and then with her murder. Photos of the Moores are posted with this case summary. Investigators believe they kidnapped Elvis and then murdered her at the Peachtree Boat Landing, where her car was found. In March 2016, however, the charges of indecent exposure, obstruction of justice and murder against the couple were dismissed. Sidney was tried for kidnapping in June 2016, but the jury was unable to reach a verdict, and the case ended in a mistrial. He was later found guilty of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. In October 2018, Tammy was convicted of kidnapping and conspiring to kidnap Elvis, and sentenced to 60 years in prison. Authorities believe she and Sidney lured Elvis to the Peachtree Boat Landing on the night of her disappearance. In September 2019, Sidney was tried again in the case, and found guilty of kidnapping and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Elvis is described as a responsible young woman. She did not have a history of dropping out of sight. She is a graduate of St. James High School and had 2 waitressing jobs at the time of her disappearance, one at the Myrtle Beach House of Blues and the other at the Tilted Kill Pub and Eatery. She had been offered a job as a makeup artist at a local salon and was supposed to start work the week of Christmas. According to her loved ones, prior to her disappearance, Elvis had lived the life of an ordinary young woman. She was active on social media and had many friends. Foul play is suspected in her case due to the circumstances involved.
Number 3.
Rhonda Daugherty, 49, vanished on Tuesday, December 2, 2014, from her home in La Follette, Tennessee. Her husband, Charles Daugherty, told police that he arrived home that evening to find the back door wide open. All of her belongings, including her cell phone, purse, keys and vehicle, were located at the home. However, Rhonda was nowhere to be found. Not knowing what's happened is the biggest thing, just not knowing what's happened to her. Is she out here cold and alone? I don't know. I want to find her, Charles told NBC affiliate WBIR. Family and friends said it's very unlike Rhonda to simply vanish, especially as she is expected to become a first-time grandmother this week. Police have not commented on whether or not the mother's disappearance is suspicious, but they have launched an investigation. The sheriff's office is also offering a $5,000 reward for information that leads to her whereabouts. We're just devastated, Rhonda's cousin, Scott Kitts, told Dateline. Especially with the holidays coming up, we are all out of minds with worry. Rhonda is a big part of the community here. The Campbell County Sheriff's Office has increased the reward for information regarding Rhonda Daugherty's disappearance from $4,500 to $10,000, according to NBC affiliate WBIR. The Campbell County Grand Jury has indicted Lonnie Van with first-degree murder and kidnapping charges in connection with the disappearance of La Follette woman Rhonda Daugherty. Rhonda's body has not been found. Officials have yet to release what evidence they have in the case. However, Rhonda's husband, Charles Daugherty, was listed as a witness on a grand jury indictment from July 2014 that charged Van with solicitation of a minor, according to NBC affiliate WBIR. Chief Deputy Aaron Evans told Dateline that Van, who is currently in custody in South Carolina after fleeing the state, will soon be extradited back to Tennessee. Van is also facing robbery charges after he allegedly robbed a married couple in their home back in early December. Investigators told WBIR that Van had previously worked for the couple and was invited into their home before he pulled a gun on them, tied them up, and stole cash and several firearms. In July 2014, Van was indicted on charges of solicitation of a minor, resulting from an accusation made in October 2013 from a 13-year-old student who told police Van took her off campus and attempted to kiss her. Daugherty was last seen the morning of December 2, 2014. Her husband, Charles Daugherty, told police that he arrived home that evening to find the back door wide open. All of her belongings, including her cell phone, purse, keys and vehicle, were located at the home. However, Rhonda was nowhere to be found.
Number 4.
2 women arrested in the slaying of a Seattle woman who disappeared in Dallas face new charges, and court documents reveal additional details about the case. Authorities filed 1 count each of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence against Lisa Jo Dykes, 57, and Nina Tamer Morano, 49, earlier this month in connection with the death of Maricela Botello Velades, court records show. The women, along with 31-year-old Charles Anthony Beltran, also face 1 count each of capital murder. According to a new affidavit, Beltran told police he brought the 23-year-old woman home, but fled after he woke up as one of the other women was attacking her with a knife. An attorney who is representing Dykes and Morano, Valerie Baston, declined to comment on the allegations Thursday, and said she and her co-counsel were waiting to be provided with evidence in the case, so they could vigorously defend our clients. Beltran's lawyer did not respond to requests for comment. Botello was visiting a friend in Dallas last fall when she disappeared. She went out alone on the night of October 4, and was last seen alive early the next morning in Deep Ellum. Security footage showed her leaving an Elm Street bar with a man. Her friend became worried, and notified her family, when she didn't return to his home. Botello missed her flight home, and there was no activity on her cell phone, bank account or social media accounts after she disappeared. Botello's body was found March 24 in a wooded area near East Beltline and Post Oak Roads in Wilmer in southern Dallas County. The Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office has not released the cause of her death. Police identified Beltran as a person of interest in the case soon after Botello vanished, saying that neither he nor his car had been seen since that night. In an arrest warrant affidavit, authorities wrote that cell phone records put Botelho with all three suspects at a Mesquite home that Beltran and Dykes shared on the day she disappeared. Phone records also showed Dykes and Morano leaving the home and driving to a wooded area near Hutchins that was close to several bodies of water before returning, police said. When authorities searched the home, they discovered that the carpets had been cleaned, the affidavit says. But red and brown streaks beneath the carpet appeared to be blood, and were later found to match Botelho's DNA. Police also said that Beltran's car was recovered in New York, and that they planned to test a hair found in its trunk to see whether it was a match for Botelho. An affidavit says the three suspects displayed a pattern of avoidance during the investigation, refusing to speak to detectives on multiple occasions, leaving their jobs and moving out of their homes. Morano and Dykes were arrested separately in Florida in late March, and they both invoked their right to remain silent. Beltran was taken into custody in Utah on April 2 and spoke to authorities the following day. According to the new affidavit, Beltran admitted meeting Botelho in Deep Ellum and taking her to his home, where they had sex and fell asleep. Beltran told detectives he woke up and saw Dykes on top of Botelho, holding a knife and making a stabbing motion with one hand, while holding Botelho's neck with her other hand. He said he pushed Dykes, knocking her and Botelho to the floor, the affidavit says. Morano then came into the room and shoved him out of the way, he said. Beltran said he left the room, got dressed and fled the home, according to the affidavit. When he returned, the bedroom was spotless, and the woman told him everything had been taken care of, the affidavit says. Police wrote that they think Morano and Dykes cleaned the crime scene and disposed of Botelho's body, leading to the additional charges. All three suspects have been extradited to Texas. Beltran and Dykes remain in custody at the Dallas County Jail, with bail set at $500,000 for Beltran and $600,000 for Dykes. Morano, who also had bail of $600,000, bonded out of custody Thursday morning, according to the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. Authorities have not elaborated on the relationship among the suspects, and Baston, the attorney for the women, declined to describe how they knew one another. An affidavit lists the names Lisa Beltran and Nina Beltran as aliases for the two women. Public records show that Morano, a Pennsylvania resident, is a lawyer who is licensed to practice in Florida and New York. In Florida, business records for a law firm she founded list Dykes as the company's registered agent. In New York, state records say Morano works for the New York City Housing Authority. A spokeswoman for the Housing Authority said Thursday that Morano had not worked for the agency since her arrest. Dykes and Morano's criminal histories are limited to traffic infractions, public records show. Beltran was convicted of aggravated robbery in Travis County in 2007. Authorities said he pistol whipped a man after taking his wallet. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but a judge released him on probation after about 4 months. Beltran was found to have violated the terms of his probation in 2009 and was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison.
Number 5.
On the weekend of September 23, 2007, Lisa Lee Chandler, 44, was feeling sick. She called her mother, Marie Johnson, to let her know and to chat about her life. "We talked all day, practically all day long," Marie told Dateline. She said the two were particularly close, and that Lisa, a mother of 2 boys, was supposed to visit her and her husband the next day at their home in Starks, Louisiana, a 6-hour drive from Lisa's home outside Wall City, Texas. "She was one of the best mothers that you could ever ask for," Marie told Dateline about her daughter Lisa. "She was a dang good person. She was always out there for the underdog." Lisa's oldest son Chris Chandler said growing up, he was close with his mother. "She was really involved with me and my brother's life," he told Dateline. Chris was attending Chipola College in Marianna, Florida in 2007. His younger brother Tyler lived there with him. According to Marie, her daughter Lisa was feeling particularly stressed that day because of her health issues and because she was going through a divorce. Over the phone, Lisa told her mother that she planned to go to the doctor the following morning before heading out for her parents' house. Marie said she had to end their call around 3 p.m. because she had plans. She called Lisa back at midnight to see how she was doing, but no one picked up the phone at the house. Worried about her daughter, Marie called her again at 6 a.m. the next morning. Again, no one picked up, which Marie said was out of character for her daughter. Marie called a friend of Lisa's and asked him to go over to her daughter's house. According to Marie, he said he could not get into the home because Lisa's protective dog was loose in the fenced area surrounding the house. Marie and her husband decided to drive from their home in Louisiana to their daughter's home to make sure everything was okay. Marie says the couple arrived around 1:30 p.m. When they arrived, they found Lisa's car was outside the house. Because the dog was used to Marie, she was able to get to the front door and found it unlocked. She went in and found all of Lisa's belongings, including her purse, glasses, and cigarettes inside on a table. Lisa was nowhere to be found. Everything was right there on the table, Marie told Dateline. And she definitely wouldn't go nowhere without them cigarettes. Marie called a few of her daughter's friends, but none of them had seen her that day. She then called the Hunt County Sheriff's Office. Sergeant Jeff Haynes, lead detective on Lisa's case, told Dateline that officers were dispatched that afternoon on a welfare check to Lisa's home. He confirmed Lisa's home was unlocked, her purse was on the table, and her TV was on. He also does not believe Lisa made it to her morning doctor's appointment. We're not ruling anything out on this case, Sergeant Haynes told Dateline. Lisa's case became a missing persons case when no one had heard from her 24 hours after she was initially reported missing to police. Ground searches were launched, and Lisa's sons Chris and Tyler immediately flew to Texas to help the search efforts on foot. Chris said it was a very overwhelming and confusing time for him and his brother. There were suspicions, but we really focused on trying to locate her, trying to set those initial reactions aside and trying to find her, Chris told Dateline. Sergeant Haynes told Dateline that in the days following Lisa's disappearance, the Hunt County Sheriff's Office also used helicopter searches equipped with infrared heat searching technology, but the aerial searches were unsuccessful. They also used search dogs, which tracked Lisa's scent to about 5 miles away from her house before losing the trail. Over the past 11 years, Sergeant Haynes estimates police have searched close to 1,500 acres in the area surrounding Lisa's home. He says no one has used Lisa's name or social security number since she went missing. I don't believe she left on her own accord, Sergeant Haynes told Dateline. It's a very strange case. It's frustrating because we don't have any direction to go with this. We need community members to come forward with information. Lisa's disappearance has been heartbreaking for her mother. She believes Lisa may have left her home with someone she knew. After 11 years, I would like to hear something, Marie told Dateline. She's not some dog to be left out there. Chris says his mother's disappearance has been hard to deal with for both him and his brother. It's been a rollercoaster. We're handling it in our own ways, but it has been rough. It affected a lot of aspects of my life, Chris said. I really hope the police continue to use all the resources they have available to solve my mom's case. Lisa Lee Chandler would be 55 years old today. She is 5'6" with hazel eyes and brown hair. If you have any information about Lisa's disappearance, please contact Sergeant Jeff Haynes at 903-453-6809.
Number 6.
A new sheriff in Hunt County is breathing new life into one of the most mysterious missing person cases in North Texas. Michael Chambers, 70, disappeared March 10, 2017. He was last seen on surveillance video leaving a Walmart in Quinlan, a small town in Hunt County. He was a retired Dallas firefighter, family man and fixer, according to his daughter Susie Chambers Floyd. There was nothing he couldn't fix, Floyd said. Since her father's death, she moved from North Texas to a picturesque property in the Hill Country. It should be a peaceful fairy tale life, and it is, save for this one horrible situation, Floyd said. In 2017, investigators say Michael Chambers disappeared from his property in Hunt County. His wife reported him missing when she came home to an empty house. I'm really torn because we don't have any answers, said the then Sheriff Randy Meeks. Investigators said they found a small amount of blood in Chambers' workshop, along with his wallet and keys. Tireless searches in the months that followed turned up few clues. The last update came in 2018 when the sheriff at the time shared his belief that Chambers may have jumped off a bridge over Lake Tawakoni. I really feel like he jumped in there himself and committed suicide, Sheriff Meeks told NBC5's media partner KRLD. Floyd and her family rejected the idea Chambers killed himself, then and now. Absolutely not. Not one tiny bit of me would believe that that was the truth, Floyd said. She hired a private investigator who reportedly gave information to the new Hunt County Sheriff Terry Jones, which led to a search last weekend. That was a big effort and it was so appreciated, Floyd said. The Hunt County Sheriff's Office says 78 members of law enforcement and vetted volunteers searched for evidence Saturday on 420 acres of dense woods, open pastures and creek beds. The search involved the use of canines, all-terrain vehicles, a drone, riders on horseback and individuals on foot, the sheriff's office stated in a press release. Floyd says it's given her new hope her family may one day get answers. You hope for an outcome, you hope for answers, you hope for closure, but it's not going to be a happy fairy tale ending where I have my dad back, she said. Anyone with information about the Chambers case is asked to call the sheriff's office at 903-453-6838 or contact Hunt County Crime Stoppers at 903-457-2929 or download the app, p3tips.com.
Number 7.
In the fall of 2017, 19-year-old Jared Chavez had just finished 10 months in the Air Force when he decided to move from his home state of Louisiana down to Houston, Texas. His father Willie Smith told us. He went down there for more opportunities. He was taking online classes. He had a job at hooking up satellite dishes, Willie said of his son Jared. I was proud of him. Jared had only been in Houston for a few months and was living with Willie's niece. Willie said he spoke to his son about once a week, but his wife, Angela, spoke to their son every day. On January 12, 2018, she spoke to him about 9 p.m. that night, Willie told us, adding that nothing seems out of the ordinary. What seemed like a typical Friday night for their son turned into the beginning of what Willie calls an unimaginable nightmare within a couple of hours. Family would later learn that at 10:39 p.m. that night, witnesses saw Jared get into a black Ford Fusion in the 8800 block of Westheimer Road in Houston, Texas, according to a press release from Crime Stoppers of Houston. While Jared was riding in the back seat of a black Ford Fusion driven by the suspect, a verbal disagreement occurred and gunshots were fired, the release states. According to a witness, Jared Chavez never exited the vehicle and has not been seen since. On Tuesday, Houston Police Department homicide investigator Gordon Sullivan told us that he had been assigned the case 1 month after Jared's disappearance, even though it is still being worked as a missing person case. There's information that we do have, but of course I can't comment on that, because it's an open and active investigation, Investigator Sullivan said. At this time, we are looking into multiple suspects. I'm not saying multiple did it, but we are investigating multiple people. The Crime Stoppers of Houston press release names one suspect as Bull Suave, but Houston police declined to confirm or deny such details. Jared's father, Willie, says he and his wife, who live in Louisiana, heard from family the following day, a Saturday, that Jared had not come home. Willie added that he tried calling his son's phone, but it was going straight to voicemail. I got on the road and I got there Sunday, Willie told us. I stayed in Houston a whole week, searching dumpsters, searching everywhere. And nobody was telling me anything. The number one thing we do want out there in public is that he is missing, his family is concerned, and he hasn't been heard from since January 12, Investigator Sullivan told us. We are still actively following leads as they come in. We have been searching anywhere our leads take us. Investigator Sullivan declined to comment on where, exactly, authorities have searched. In September of 2018, 9 months after Jared was last seen, Willie traveled back down to Houston to continue searching for his son. I went down and put out flyers. I go door to door talking to people, Willie said. And we put up $5,000 for a reward. This past Saturday, at a prayer vigil on the anniversary of Jared's disappearance, Crime Stoppers of Houston announced an increased reward of $10,000 for information on his case. Jared had a son that was born in April, and now we have the baby, because the mom is in the Air Force, Willie told us. We get by day and wait for God to give the answers. Jared Chavez is described as being 5'7" and weighing 160 pounds, with brown eyes and black hair. Jared has the following tattoos. On his upper left arm, the words Helen Welch, his grandmother's name, inside of praying hands with the date she died. On his right tricep, the letter J. On his left tricep, the letter C. On his inner right forearm, the quote, "No weapon formed against me shall prosper." He was last seen wearing jeans, a red hoodie, white t-shirt, denim vest and the orange LeBron James tennis shoes. If you have any information on Jared's whereabouts, please call the Houston Police Department at 832-394-1840.
Number 8.
An Acona man who is a person of interest in the disappearance of 18-year-old Caleb Deal has been charged with a federal sex crime connected to the missing teen, according to court documents. Years before Caleb's disappearance, Ricky Dale Howard is suspected of making sexual images of a 13 to 15-year-old boy, images on a computer later sent to Tennessee, according to court documents. Howard, 59, was arrested February 12 and was being held Tuesday in Wichita County Jail, according to jail and court records. A federal judge has ordered Howard held without bail on a charge of sexual exploitation of a minor, according to court documents. Suspicion has long rested on Howard after Caleb's March 30, 2015, disappearance from Nocona. Investigators have turned up evidence that resulted in many charges against Howard. The latest was detailed in a federal complaint, written by an FBI special agent. The complaint gave this account. An 18-year-old went missing March 30, 2015, from Nocona. An investigation by the Montague County District Attorney's Office and the Sheriff's Office identified Howard as one of the last people to communicate with the teenager. Around October 25, 2017, DA's investigators obtained a Gateway desktop computer belonging to Howard. The North Texas Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory in Dallas found about 300 images of child pornography on the computer. The lab also found a number of images of the 18-year-old as a minor on the computer. While none of those images are pornography, there are some taken over several years of him in various stages of undress. Montague County investigators seized an Acer laptop computer, which had been owned by Howard, around September 18, 2018. Howard had given the Acer laptop to a family member in Tennessee to help run his business. The laptop is a means of interstate and foreign commerce. The Dallas lab's forensic analysis revealed several images consistent with child pornography on the computer. There were 4 images showing Howard engaging in sexual conduct with a male minor. Family members of Howard and the missing 18-year-old confirmed their identities in photos where faces are visible. The teenager's family estimated him to be approximately 13 to 15 years old when the images were made, so they were taken between March 15, 2010 and March 15, 2012. The missing 18-year-old's family confirmed he routinely visited Howard, including from the ages of 13 to 15, because the families and children were close friends. In addition, family members of both Howard and the missing teen confirmed the images showed a couch in a camper trailer owned by Howard and parked on his property during that time. The 4 images of Howard and the teenage boy appear to have been taken in a series. And the 2 referred to in the complaint, the boy is nude, while Howard sexually abuses him. The Acer laptop containing the images of Howard and the boy engaged in sexually explicit conduct was manufactured at least partly outside of Texas. So the computer was part of interstate and foreign commerce. What's more, the laptop was transported using interstate commerce when it traveled from Howard's possession in Texas to the family member in Tennessee. The FBI agent believes Howard committed sexual exploitation of a child. There is probable cause Howard had the boy take part in sexual acts to make illegal images, using a computer produced with materials from interstate commerce. And then, Howard sent the images on the computer from Texas to Tennessee via interstate commerce. According to previous Times Record news reports, Howard was due to get out of state prison this year, after serving 5 years for 11 counts of possession of a firearm by a felon. He pleaded guilty in 2016. The former president of First National Bank in Bowie, Howard was a convicted felon who pleaded guilty to bank fraud in 2007. Howard also faces a host of state allegations that he habitually sexually preyed on children and possessed child pornography. Meanwhile, Caleb's family and friends are left in the dark about his fate. The 18-year-old had been living in Grapevine, but often visited Nocona and worked part-time for Howard, according to previous Times Record news reports. The day of Caleb's disappearance, he asked Howard to borrow a truck. 2 days later, it was back, and the keys were in their place in the business. Caleb's mother, Tommy Deal, reported him missing April 1, 2015. For Howard's latest charge, he made an initial appearance February 17 by telephone in a Wichita Falls federal court, according to court documents filed in U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas. U.S. Magistrate Judge Hal R. Ray Jr. granted an assistant U.S. attorney's motion for pretrial detention during Howard's appearance, according to court documents. The judge noted Howard was in state custody on pending charges at the time, according to court records. Ray ruled Howard could ask to revisit his federal detention if he resolved those charges, according to court records. The judge also ordered Howard to be committed to federal custody, according to court records. Ray set a preliminary hearing via teleconference for 2 p.m. March 3, according to court documents.
Number 9.
James Corbett Flint says his mother Kimberly Flint, 57, loves going to church and gardening outside her home in Laneville, Texas. Corbett told us his mother, a homemaker, is also a bit of a homebody. Since Kimberly didn't like to leave home, she often called her husband James Roy Flint to bring dinner home on his way back from work. In fact, she called him on September 26 at around 3:10 p.m. to ask if he could bring her some food on his way home. Corbett says he was returning to town after being away from home for 2 months driving trucks for work. He told us his dad suggested that he pick up Kimberly so they could all meet and go out for dinner. She said no, but that was nothing out of the ordinary. Corbett told us about his father's phone call. He says his dad didn't think Kimberly sounded distressed or different. At 3:45 p.m., Highway Patrol responded to a report of a one-vehicle crash on Highway 84, Sheriff Jeff Price of the Rusk County Sheriff's Office told us. Around 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, Corbett says his father received a phone call from the Rusk County Sheriff's Office, saying they had found the Flint's 2016 green Jeep Grand Cherokee. They said it was found crashed into a cement guardrail on the side of Highway 84 near the Angelina River Bridge. Kimberly was nowhere to be found. A statement by the Rusk County Sheriff's Office confirmed that Kimberly was last heard from at 3 p.m. that day, and that her car was found off Highway 84. Corbett says the police told his father they found the car in neutral, both sets of keys inside. Kimberly's glasses were also found inside. Kimberly was nowhere to be found. Corbett told us it is very strange for his mother to be driving at all, because she usually refused to drive. She didn't like to drive. She said she didn't feel comfortable, he said. My mom didn't really like to go anywhere. James went home to check if Kimberly was at home, but could not find her. He picked up Corbett, and the two met with the sheriff's office to give a description of Kimberly for a missing persons report to the National Crime Information Center. Corbett, who is a retired Marine military police officer, said he went to his mother's home to do his own investigating, while his father James went to the scene of the crash. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, Corbett told us. I found her purse with everything still inside, and I found her phone on the arm of a chair with the charger wrapped around it, like if you had just put it down, and you were going to come back. Around 6 p.m. that night, Corbett joined his father where police had found the car, about 15 miles from Kimberly and James' home. He said he noticed that police were not on the scene, so he called the sheriff's office, and 2 deputies joined them. They searched until 1 a.m. The following day, Corbett says the search efforts grew to include search dogs and horses, and expanded foot searches. Corbett says both he and police called local hospitals, but did not find Kimberly. Sheriff Price told Dateline police have conducted multiple dog searches, river searches since Kimberly's disappearance, and that they have searched her car for clues. There were no signs of bodily fluids, blood or anything of that nature at the car, Sheriff Price told Dateline. He says his office has processed the car more than once, and that none of its windows were broken. We are fairly certain that she was the one driving the vehicle, he said. She knew that my dad was coming home within 45 minutes with her food, and she knew I was coming in after working for 2 months. Why would she just jump up, leaving everything? Corbett said to Dateline. From everything I see, I think there is a lot of possibilities about what has happened, Corbett told Dateline. He thinks someone could have tried to kidnap his mother. Sheriff Price says police are looking into the possibility that Kimberly was picked up by a stranger after her car accident. He says police are sifting through evidence, including important electronic evidence. He says he is urging the public to come forward with any and all information. Corbett is spearheading the family's efforts to find Kimberly. As time goes by, he is becoming increasingly worried about his mother. I'm in disbelief that my mother is gone. I am trying to focus on finding her and put all that emotion inside my head, Corbett said. I'm just worried if she is out there. I don't want her to be in pain. Kimberly is described as being 5 tall and weighing about 150 pounds. She has gray hair and needs glasses. If you have any information on Kimberly's disappearance, please call the Rusk County Sheriff's Office at 903-657-3581.
Number 10.
In 2016, 35-year-old Chrislyn Gibson enjoyed a night out with her friend, Sydney Taylor. It was April 1 when they traveled from Houston to Austin, Texas to attend the Urban Music Festival, and because they were so close to his home, Sydney called up his buddy Harvey Lester Cyphers. It's reported that Sydney knew Cyphers for many years, so the trio eventually linked up and decided to make their way over to a club called the Landing Strip. They stayed there until 2 a.m. and were captured by surveillance footage leaving the establishment, but that would be the last time anyone saw 2 of those people alive. An hour after they left the nightclub, Sydney's other friend, the person who they were staying with in town, checked in on him and Chrislyn to see if they were safe. Sydney told that person that they were with Cyphers. After those early morning hours on April 2nd, no one was able to get into contact with Chrislyn Gibson or Sydney Taylor. It didn't take long for loved ones of both adults to file missing person reports, and soon, investigators zeroed in on Cyphers, the last person known to be with the pair. Just days after they disappeared, Sydney's vehicle was found in Houston, over 150 miles away from their last location. This find piqued investigators' interest because, in the backseat, there was a large pool of blood, and in the trunk, there was evidence of blood and hair. A search of Cypher's home would uncover blood evidence as well, and when police tracked cell phones, they found that on the morning of April 2, Sydney, Chrislyn, and Cypher's phones were all on the move to Houston together. It was also discovered that Cyphers made a few purchases from a local Walmart store that led authorities to believe that he was attempting to dispose of the remains of Chrislyn Gibson and Sydney Taylor. In 2019, Cyphers was indicted for the murders of Chrislyn and Sydney, and prosecutors alleged that the 53-year-old used a bath mat, a shower liner, and shower curtains to conceal their bodies. Days after the two friends disappeared, police questioned Cyphers and found him in possession of firearms. In 2001, he was convicted of unlawful possession of a firearm, and in 1998, he was convicted of possession of a controlled substance. Because of his criminal past, Cyphers served 2 years for having a firearm and was released in February 2019. However, earlier this week, Harvey Lester Cyphers was officially charged with capital murder in connection to the disappearances of Chrislyn Gibson and Sydney Taylor. He was reportedly arrested without incident, and his bond has been set at $1.5 million. This case is ongoing. The remains of Chrislyn Gibson and Sydney Taylor have not been located, and they remain missing. At the time of her disappearance, Chrislyn Gibson stood 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 110 pounds. She had brown hair and brown eyes. She also had multiple tattoos. Betty Boop on the outside of her left leg, a butterfly on the top of her left foot, and the word 1 on her left upper thigh. Anyone with information regarding this case is urged to contact the Austin Police Department at 512-974-5210 or their local authorities. Please share this story about Chrislyn Gibson and Sydney Taylor in the hopes of attaining justice for them and their loved ones. She is our sister and her life matters.